By all reports, the landmark case Roe v. Wade will be overturned by the highest court of this land very soon. Many are viewing this as a blatant violation of individual rights by an overreaching government, while others view it as democracy fulfilled. So which is it? To answer this question, we need to first establish the actual practical effect of this decision. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, it will not mean that abortions are suddenly illegal. Rather, it'll mean that the regulation of abortion will be left to the discretion of each state. And this result is a consequence of one of the most basic tenets of our government, federalism. Federalism is a democratic principle installed by our founders to prevent an overpowered central government. This concept is so integral to the legitimacy of Roe v. Wade that it's worthwhile to spend some time to understand its meaning and origins. Prior to this nation's founding, this land was held by 13 independent colonies, loosely governed under the control of the British Empire. However, as all great powers tend to do, the monarchy gradually began to exert more influence over the colonies, most notably by increasing taxes. The colonies rejected these overtures and formed an alliance to overcome British rule in the Revolutionary War. At the end of this conflict, the colonies recognized that raising, supplying, and directing an army capable of fending off another dominant superpower would require a centralized government to coordinate efforts. But after just displacing a tyrannical authority, the colonies were reluctant to simply turn over power to another overreaching sovereign entity. Each colony had its own unique customs, culture, and laws that they wanted to preserve. To allay these concerns, the United States of America was established under a limited document of grant, the Constitution. The Constitution did not give the federal government plenary power to do whatever it pleased. Rather, every single power of the federal government was enumerated. If power over a specific area wasn't expressly indicated, the government would not have any authority to regulate it. All other governance was left for each state or locality to determine based on its unique beliefs and viewpoints. And thus, federalism was born. The idea was that the vast majority of laws that govern everyday life would be dictated by each state, and that the federal government would only have the authority over discrete areas where centralized control was absolutely necessary. This was designed to ensure that governmental action was enacted as close to the political will of the people as possible, within states, cities, and communities. And this principle of federalism is still relevant today. The laws that govern the people in Florida, for example, shouldn't be the same laws that govern the people in California, because, generally speaking, people in these states have different interests and concerns and hold different views. However, when the federal government enacts a law, it supersedes all state and local laws. As a consequence, as we've witnessed on many occasions, federal laws will often end up causing half the country, tens of millions of people, to feel disenfranchised. Now, of course, the form of governance that is most localized is self-governance by the individual. And it is this principle that led to our constitutional amendments that enshrined limitations on the government in favor of protecting individual rights, which now brings us back to Roe v. Wade. In that case, the Supreme Court held that the right to an abortion was part and parcel to the right of privacy embedded within the 14th Amendment, which provides that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. However, opponents of Roe v. Wade and its progeny argue that nowhere in the 14th Amendment is a right to abortion or even a right to privacy contemplated, and therefore Roe is a violation of the express limitations on the federal government that we just discussed, where the political will of each state has been replaced by the dictates of a federal mandate. In the view of many, including prominent liberal legal scholars, Roe v. Wade was a case of the judiciary creating new policy from whole cloth, which is not its proper role. In our system of government, the legislature alone has the power to create laws, and only in those areas that are within one of the expressed grants of authority enumerated in the Constitution. This is why our legislature is comprised of multiple representatives from each state that are subject to re-election every 2 to 6 years. This is intended to ensure that the ones making the laws that govern us are beholden to the popular will of their constituents. The justices on the Supreme Court, on the other hand, are not elected by the people, and they have life tenure. And this was intended to ensure that the justices were completely removed from political will. The sole role of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution and other laws, not to formulate any new rules or policies. The founders of this country did not go to war against a tyrannical monarchy, only to be governed by 9 lawyers in black robes that do not answer to the people. Now, pro-choice advocates contend that the right for a person to have autonomy over its own body is something that should not be subject to outside governance at all. But the general right to autonomy, of course, is not without limits. All laws, in essence, are an encumbrance on free will. That is what they are designed to do. I am free to swing my arm however I please, but I cannot do it in a manner that causes my fist to contact another person's face. I'm also free to lay down to take a rest whenever I want, but I can't spend the night on someone else's property without their permission. And I can use my mouth to form whatever words I desire, but I can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So although I do have a general right to do with my body whatever I please, this right can be limited by the government when it infringes upon the rights of others. In that regard, the entire abortion debate hinges upon this conundrum. Is the fetus a person that has rights protectable by the government? If it is a person, then its right to live supersedes the right of its mother to discard it in the same way that the right of an infant to live supersedes the right of its parent to kill it. And the community at large has an interest and the authority to protect that child. But if the fetus is not a person, then it has no rights which can be infringed upon. The reality, whether we like it or not, is that the question of whether a fetus is a person will never yield a clear answer. Many have tried, and will continue to try, to set a bright line rule on when life is conceived, whether it be at conception, after the 2nd trimester, or at viability. But the truth is that these are all just subjective opinions because no judge or any human being can definitively define what life is. This question is and will always remain a mystery. And this is the exact type of widely contested, unsolvable matter that our founders believed is best addressed by the form of government that is closest to political will, which will never be the federal government. Now, some of you may reject the premise of this argument entirely. You may believe that federalism and our system of government is illegitimate, created by a group of deeply flawed individuals who should have no authority over our lives today. To those people, I would pose a question. What is your alternative? Of course, our current system is not perfect and will always result in a measure of discontent. But if we were to blow up that system entirely, what would you have in its place? Would you prefer a central authority that unilaterally dictates how hundreds of millions of people across our country with vastly different beliefs live? That proposition may seem attractive to those that are currently in power, but keep in mind, control is only temporary, and absolute rule can cut both ways. If, for example, pro-lifers wielded total control, they would likely enact a federal law that makes any abortion after conception a crime. So although to many the overturning of Roe v. Wade may seem like a total loss for pro-choice advocates, in reality it is actually a compromise. That compromise is for this debate, which will never end, to be determined by the political will of the people.